Okay, this is pretty wild. We're getting an Horizon Zero Dawn remaster or remake for PlayStation 5 according to a brand new leak from Multiplayer First, which has also been confirmed by many other people, including Video Game Chronicle, Lance McDonald and Tom Henderson, who all have a really good track record. So I think we can say for certain that it's going to happen, and we also got some details as to what is new with this version. I will of course also share my take on if it's actually needed, and there's also a way more exciting part of this rumor, namely regarding a separate multiplayer game for PC and PS5. So a ton to go over. Of course, if you are curious about the future of Horizon, then leaving a like would really support the channel, subscribe for everything on the franchise, and let's go. Okay, yes, on paper, remaking a 5-year-old game sounds crazy, and I also on one hand agree with the people that thought that a PS5 re-release of the first Last of Us 9 years after launch was not needed. Now, to be fair, I did enjoy my part 1 playthrough, and the differences, especially in terms of graphics, are of course really noticeable, as I also touched on in my recent breakdown video. But yeah, not worth the full price in my opinion if you already played the game before. Like, there are many ways to approach this Zero Dawn remaster news. I see a lot of people say, why remake Zero Dawn and not Jak and Daxter? I want to touch on that as well, but I think it's important to first look at what this PS5 version of Horizon 1 is probably going to be before we can really make a judgment. So the original reporting notes that the remake features an improved lighting system, ambient occlusion, overhauled textures and better animations, with new character models to match those found in the sequel. Like, for one, I think we can obviously say that the graphical enhancements we saw on PC versus PS4 will be in this PS5 version as well, maybe even including the ultra-wide support, which Death Stranding's director's cut on PS5 had too, and as you might know, that game is made with the same Decima engine. Now, the PC version of Zero Dawn had unlocked frame rates, while I think on PS5 we will likely see the 3 modes we also see in Forbidden West. So the favor resolution option for better graphics at 30 FPS, the favor performance option for that stable 60 FPS but with the lower resolution, and they actually later added the balance mode, which is 40 FPS and still has a ton of the graphical enhancements that we also see in the resolution mode. Zero Dawn on PS4 had no such modes. On PS4 Pro we also saw a favor performance and favor resolution mode, but the frame rate was still stuck at 30 in both. And Guerrilla of course enabled 60 FPS if you are playing Zero Dawn on PS5. So actually already playing Zero Dawn on the new console is a big step up from the PS4 versions. So I think the biggest changes and upgrades will focus on making Zero Dawn more like Forbidden West. The same character models were mentioned. Zero Dawn of course already looks great, but it's night and day versus how realistic Aloy looks in the sequel. She looks like a real human now, and the improved expressions also translate really well to emotional moments, and her snarky jokes might now also work better in Zero Dawn if they bring the new character model over. Now of course many other characters from Zero Dawn had their model updated in Forbidden West, so I'm sure they can bring those over, but I'm overall curious how they want to improve the regular conversations where you're zoomed in on the character faces. Like, if there's one thing that needs an update, it's this, and I think it would be a huge undertaking to go for the full-on motion capture approach like we saw in Forbidden West, so I don't think it will be on the same level, but I'm sure they will improve it somehow. For gameplay changes themselves, there are some subtle improvements, mostly those being the quality of life improvements the sequel brought. And it's once again according to Multiplayer First, so I think things like the no pickup animation that I now cannot live without in Forbidden West, which also works by the way on the back of a mount. Like, would be nice to have that in Zero Dawn 2, as it's really annoying now to have to stop for each plant when you know that there is a solution in the sequel. Maybe they bring over transmog we saw added to Forbidden West after launch. Would be nice to rock the look of one outfit while having the stats of the other in Zero Dawn 2, and maybe a feature to reset our skill points so we can spend them elsewhere will also be added to Zero Dawn. Like, obviously we would get improved load times. I went back to Zero Dawn for this video, and even when playing on PS5 these are still pretty long. Of course, DualSense features will be utilized, and in The Last of Us Remake, they changed a lot of the UI elements to make them similar to Part 2, so I totally think the weapon wheel, for example, will be updated, and hopefully also include 6 spots. And the article also talks about the big focus on bringing accessibility options that the sequel introduced. Like Zero Dawn has very few, so it basically makes the game unplayable for some people. So bringing these over, like being able to change the weapon wheel slowdown, being able to hold instead of toggle, which I prefer in every game now. There are also way more ways to customize the difficulty. Maybe like easy loot will become a thing in Zero Dawn as well. Like I would imagine that a lot of work they did on Forbidden West can be pretty easily translated to Zero Dawn. So that would already make it way less of an undertaking than going back to a random PS1 game and remaking that for the modern consoles. I really don't think that you can compare that. And all the details that were shared in this leak do not sound like a remake at all, but more like a Spider-Man remastered situation, which ended up being a really nice next-gen version that included a lot of the PS5 features that Insomniac already made for Miles Morales anyways. Character models were of course also improved, or in this case even changed, as we got a brand new Peter. I still miss the old one. You had to pay $20 extra to get this remastered version with the Miles Morales Digital Deluxe Edition, and I would only spend $20 for an improved version of one of my favorite games of all time in Zero Dawn. Like, full price seems way too much, so I really hope it's in that $20 range. And I overall think that the remaster criticism is totally valid. Like, I would also prefer it if Guerrilla focuses on Forbidden West DLC and a third game instead of going back to Zero Dawn. I'm really curious if this remaster is actually slowing down production on new things. I hope not, or if it's like being made by a separate team. But still, like, Sony is probably doing the math, and for them it's really worth it to make an updated version for the Netflix crowd that will probably come in once the show hits in maybe 2024. And by that point, Zero Dawn would be 7 years old. Like, we've seen it time and time again, how a TV show based on a game can increase the popularity for that game immensely, with Cyberpunk most recently of course seeing an insane resurgence. Sony wants that too for their games, with first The Last of Us on HBO and then Horizon. So while I still think that a Zero Dawn remaster is not needed, it does make sense that Sony prefers to have a native PS5 version with all the modern bells and whistles instead of asking new people to download a PS4 game onto their probably newly bought PS5. And right now it doesn't seem to be the case, but there is a ton of new Horizon stuff that we can play coming soon, because the way more exciting news that kinda got buried by the remaster is that a team, presumed to be Guerrilla Games, at PlayStation are currently developing a Horizon online multiplayer game for both the PS5 and PC. Next gen only? Yes please. Like, this should be a co-op machine hunting game, and the customization should be around the different tribes. So maybe we can pick a tribe as a sort of faction, and maybe each tribe has like special tools or weapons linked to that. My imagination is already running wild. I think this could be very, very interesting, and I also think that this is what Simon LaRouche is working on. He has been on a multiplayer project at Guerrilla for almost 5 years now. I really think there's a bubble that is about to burst, and that will like reveal a ton of new Horizon content. Maybe there will be a Horizon showcase similar to the Assassin's Creed showcase we had. I mean, at this point, they got a ton to show. And when we know more, I'll of course be the first to tell you here, so totally subscribe for everything Horizon Forbidden West and the future of the franchise if you haven't already. A like on the video would of course really help me out. And check out my previous video on the Call of the Mountain game and how Guerrilla overall wants to double down on the Horizon franchise. I will speak to you soon, goodbye.